The universe is vast, so vast that even the most advanced civilizations struggle to chart its entirety. There are ancient empires, ruthless warlords, and creatures that defy all logic. But sometimes, the most unpredictable force in the cosmos isn't an armada or a godlike being. Sometimes it's just one human with too much free time. Jason Carter wasn't a hero, a soldier, or a genius. He was just a guy who had grown incredibly, unbearably bored. The kind of boredom that creeps in when you've been traveling alone in deep space for too long. He had taken a job hauling cargo between distant colonies, a monotonous routine that left him staring at the same blinking lights on his control panel for weeks at a time. No wars, no excitement, just endless stretches of nothing. So, when his ship's sensors picked up an uncharted planet with a breathable atmosphere, he thought, why not? Landing was easy. The ship's AI had already confirmed there were no immediate threats. No extreme weather, no killer radiation, no horrifying alien monsters waiting to rip him apart. It was a lush world, covered in sprawling forests and rolling hills, the kind of place people would have fought over back in the old days. But as far as he could tell, nobody had claimed it yet. Jason wandered for a bit, enjoying the fresh air and open sky. It was a nice break from the recycled oxygen of his ship. He had no grand ambitions, no mission. Just a man stretching his legs on an unexplored world. He even set up a hammock between two massive trees and took a nap, because why not? The galaxy could wait. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that he had already caused a planetary crisis. The inhabitants of the planet, a civilization of insectoid beings known as the Zeldar, had been watching him since the moment he entered their airspace. To them, Jason was an enigma, an unknown entity in an unmarked vessel, casually strolling through their territory as if he owned it. Their leaders, accustomed to dealing with hostile invaders and power-hungry conquerors, panicked. Who was this being? Why was he so calm? Did he already consider their world his? By the time Jason had built a small fire to cook a basic meal, the Zeldar Council had gathered in emergency session. Some argued for immediate attack, fearing he was the first scout of an invasion force. Others insisted they should surrender before his fleet arrived. After all, no single creature would dare walk so fearlessly onto an alien planet unless they had absolute power. The logic was simple: if he wasn't afraid, they should be. Meanwhile, Jason, completely unaware of the escalating panic, was roasting a skewer of alien fruit, wondering if it would go well with the last bit of seasoning he had left. He had no idea that thousands of Zeldar soldiers had already taken defensive positions just beyond his line of sight, terrified of making the wrong move. Then, purely on a whim, Jason stood, stretched his arms, and cracked his neck. It was a normal human thing, a casual, lazy motion. But to the Zeldar, it was the final confirmation of their worst fears. The Conqueror had arrived. Before Jason could take another bite of his food, a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the forest. Then another. And another. Drums? No, not drums. It was something else, something massive. From the shadows of the trees, figures emerged, hundreds of them, all kneeling, their heads lowered in absolute submission. And then a single voice spoke, shaking with fear and reverence. "Mighty One, we surrender." Jason blinked. "Wait, what?" Jason froze mid-bite, his brain struggling to process what was happening. The skewer of fruit remained in his hand, completely forgotten as he looked at the dozens, no hundreds, of kneeling figures before him. They were massive, insect-like beings, their armored bodies gleaming under the alien sun. Some of them had multiple limbs pressed to the ground, others held strange weapons, but none of them looked aggressive. In fact, they all seemed terrified. He swallowed hard. A surrender? The one who had spoken trembled slightly, but kept their head bowed. "Yes, Mighty One. Our people recognize your strength. We do not wish to oppose you." Jason stared. This had to be a joke, right? Some kind of misunderstanding? He wasn't exactly fluent in alien diplomacy, but he was pretty sure he hadn't done anything. He'd just landed, made a campfire, and stretched his arms a little. That wasn't exactly an act of war. He lowered his skewer, trying to keep his voice calm. "Listen, I think there's been a mistake. I'm not here to." But before he could finish, the Zeldar leader flinched, as if the very sound of Jason's voice carried some kind of terrible power. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the soldiers exchanged glances, their mandibles clicking nervously. Jason exhaled slowly. "Okay, new plan. Don't freak them out any more than they already are." He carefully sat back down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. The movement only seemed to confuse them further. The leader hesitated, then cautiously lifted their head. Their large, black eyes studied him, filled with something between awe and terror. Jason forced a small, awkward smile. My name's Jason." The Zeldar leader stiffened. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, they repeated, "Jason." The name spread through the gathered aliens like a wave, whispered and repeated over and over until it became a chant. Jason winced. "Great. Now I sound like some kind of ancient prophecy." He scratched the back of his head. "Okay, seriously, what's going on? Why do you think I'm—" He gestured vaguely at their kneeling forms. "Worthy of all this?" The leader hesitated again, then glanced at the others as if seeking permission. Finally, they took a cautious step forward. "You arrived without fear. Alone. No banners, no army. And yet, you walked our lands as if you had already claimed them." Jason frowned. That's it. He had heard stories of warlike alien civilizations, of species that valued power above all else. It was starting to dawn on him that, to the Zeldar, strength wasn't just about weapons or numbers. It was about confidence. A true conqueror wouldn't need to announce their arrival. They would simply exist, and the universe would bow. And because Jason had been too bored to act afraid, they had mistaken that for absolute dominance. Jason rubbed his temples. "Okay, look, I'm not here to take over your planet. I was just stretching my legs." The leader tilted their head. "Stretching your legs?" "Yeah, exercise. Long space trips get boring." He waved a hand dismissively. "Seriously, I don't want to rule anything. I was just looking for a nice spot to relax for a while." The leader looked increasingly puzzled. They turned to the others, engaging in rapid clicks and chittering that Jason couldn't understand. He sat there awkwardly, watching as the debate grew more intense. Finally, the leader turned back to him. "You do not wish to rule. And yet, you have already conquered us." Jason nearly choked. "I what? We have surrendered," the leader said simply. "The act is done. To resist now would be dishonorable." Jason stared at them, then at the gathered crowd. He could see it in their body language. These weren't warriors preparing to fight back. These were people who had already accepted their fate. They truly believed they had no other choice. He ran a hand down his face. "This is ridiculous. How do you accidentally take over a planet?" The sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, armored, drew his attention. A group of figures emerged from the trees, clad in ornate plating, their weapons carefully held at their sides. Unlike the others, they didn't immediately kneel. Instead, one of them, an older Zeldar with deep scars across their carapace, stepped forward. "So," the newcomer said in a deep, measured voice, "the rumors are true. The Conqueror walks among us." Jason groaned. "Oh, for the love of—" The older warrior studied him carefully, then nodded. "I am General Zervak. I led our forces in the last Great War." He paused, his dark eyes unreadable. "And I have come to swear my allegiance." Jason's stomach twisted. This wasn't just some misunderstanding among civilians. The military was getting involved now. His mouth went dry. "Look, you really don't have to do that." "Aye." But Zervak ignored him, sinking to one knee. "The Zeldar bow only to those who have proven their strength beyond doubt. I see now why the Council has chosen surrender. Your power is undeniable." Jason wanted to scream. What power? He was just a cargo pilot. He didn't have weapons, he didn't have troops, he didn't even have a plan. More Zeldar soldiers joined Zervak, each kneeling, their expressions solemn. The murmuring grew louder, a wave of voices repeating his name with eerie reverence. Jason swallowed hard. He needed to find a way out of this mess. But as he looked at the sea of aliens kneeling before him, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a problem. Jason sat there, his brain still trying to catch up with reality. He had landed on a random planet, made a campfire, and somehow ended up with an entire species kneeling before him. It was absurd. Impossible. And yet here they were, leaders, warriors, civilians, all treating him like he was some unstoppable force of nature. Zervak, the battle-hardened general, remained on one knee waiting. The rest of the soldiers followed his lead, their weapons laid at their sides in a clear sign of submission. Jason opened his mouth to protest again, but before he could speak, a new sound cut through the air. A deep, guttural horn. Immediately, the kneeling Zeldar stiffened. Some exchanged glances, their mandibles clicking in alarm. Even Zervak tensed, his claws tightening against the ground. Jason didn't need to understand their language to know what was happening. Something was wrong. From the far edge of the clearing, a group of Zeldar emerged, their armor different from the others, sleeker, darker, adorned with markings Jason didn't recognize. They walked with precision, their movements stiff, controlled. At the center of their formation, a single figure stood out. This one was taller than the others, their exoskeleton polished to an unnatural shine. Their deep red eyes locked onto Jason, unblinking, analyzing. Zervok exhaled sharply. The High Order has arrived. Jason frowned. The what now? Before he could get an answer, the lead figure of the new group spoke. Their voice was smooth, deliberate. So, this is the one who has claimed our world. Jason pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh, come on, I didn't claim anything. The figure didn't react. Instead, they studied him carefully, then turned to Zervok. You disappoint me, General. I expected resistance. Zervok didn't look away. To resist one of his stature would be foolish. I fight for the survival of our people. Jason groaned. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take. He needed to fix this mess fast. Okay, let's clear something up. I am not. The leader of the High Order raised a claw, silencing him. It does not matter. Jason blinked. Wait, what? You misunderstand, human. It does not matter what you believe. It matters what the people see. The figure stepped closer, their red eyes gleaming. And right now they see a conqueror. Jason felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The High Order leader turned back to Zervok. Your surrender is premature. If this being is truly as powerful as you claim, let him prove it. Zervok's mandibles tightened. You suggest a trial. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. The kneeling soldiers shifted slightly, their antennae twitching. Whatever a trial was, it wasn't good. Jason narrowed his eyes. Hold on. What exactly does this trial involve? The High Order leader smiled, a slow, unsettling expression. A simple test. If you are worthy, you will have no trouble. They gestured to the sky. A challenger will be chosen. A battle of will and strength. Jason's stomach dropped. You mean a fight? The leader's smile widened. Call it what you wish. Jason took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a warrior. He barely passed the basic hand-to-hand training required for space pilots. But the way everyone was looking at him, he knew he didn't have much of a choice. If he refused, it would shatter whatever illusion of power had kept him alive this long. And if he lost, he had a feeling things would get a lot worse. Jason looked at Zervok. If I do this, and I win, will they finally stop thinking I'm some kind of overlord? Zervok hesitated. Perhaps. Or they may believe it even more. Jason clenched his jaw. Fantastic. The High Order leader tilted their head. Do you accept the trial, human? Jason swallowed hard. This was it. One way or another, his fate, and the fate of an entire planet, was about to be decided. Jason stood in the middle of a vast arena, the alien soil firm beneath his boots. The Zeldar had moved quickly, almost as if they had been expecting this. Massive stone pillars surrounded the space, ancient symbols etched into them glowing faintly in the dim light. Above, the sky stretched wide and open, filled with the uneasy hum of thousands of Zeldar watching from the cliffs. Their silent, unblinking eyes bore down on him, waiting for the inevitable. Zervok stood beside him, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The trial of dominion is sacred, he murmured. It is not merely combat. It is a battle of will, of presence. You do not need to kill your opponent to win. Jason exhaled. Good, because I'm really not in the mood for intergalactic murder. Zervok's mandibles twitched. That does not mean it will be easy. Jason didn't need the warning. He already felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If he lost, the High Order would take control. And if that happened, there was no telling what they would do, not just to him, but to the entire planet. A deep, vibrating sound filled the air, like the chime of some massive, unseen bell. From the other side of the arena, the challenger stepped forward. Jason's stomach tightened. The Zeldar warrior was massive, easily twice his size, with an exoskeleton so dark it almost looked like it absorbed light. The air around them seemed to hum with an invisible force, as if their very presence warped reality. This wasn't just any soldier. This was something else. Zervok's voice was low. That is Krazul, the High Order's strongest. Jason sighed. Of course it is. Krazul moved with slow, deliberate steps, their four arms flexing as they approached. Their deep red eyes locked onto Jason, unblinking. Then, without a word, they raised a single clawed hand and pointed directly at him. A declaration. Jason resisted the urge to run. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. He didn't know the Zeldar rules, but if this was about confidence, he couldn't afford to show fear. The chime sounded again. Krazel lunged. Jason barely had time to react. He ducked to the side, feeling the rush of air as the warrior's clawed limb sliced through the space where his head had been a second ago. The impact cracked the stone behind him, sending dust and debris flying. Jason scrambled backward, mind racing. He needed a plan. Fast. Krazel advanced, slow but unstoppable. They weren't just strong. They were precise. Every movement was controlled, efficient, designed to corner him. Jason's eyes darted around the arena. There had to be something he could use. He wasn't going to win this with brute force. He had to be smarter. Another strike came, faster this time. Jason barely dodged, stumbling as he felt the wind from the blow graze his arm. The crowd above murmured in excitement, the tension thick enough to choke on. Krazel tilted their heads slightly, then spoke for the first time. "You are fast." Their voice was deep, almost metallic. "But you cannot run forever." Jason forced a grin, trying to ignore the fact that his legs were already burning. Wasn't planning on it. Krazel's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, they leapt, crossing the entire distance between them in the blink of an eye. Jason's instincts took over. He dropped low at the last second, rolling beneath the attack, but his foot slipped on loose gravel. He hit the ground hard, pain jolting through his shoulder. Before he could recover, Krazel was already towering over him, claws raised for the finishing blow. Jason's mind screamed for a solution. And then, he saw it. A split-second opening. A moment of imbalance in the warrior's stance. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The crowd held its breath. Jason moved. Jason twisted his body at the last second, pushing off the ground with everything he had. Krazel's claws slashed downward, missing his torso by mere inches, embedding deep into the cracked stone. Jason didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, aiming for the only weak spot he had noticed. The moment his fist connected with the side of Krazel's head, pain shot up his arm like he had just punched solid steel. It was a terrible idea. A stupid last-ditch effort. But somehow it worked. Krazel staggered. It wasn't much, barely a half-step, but the reaction sent a ripple through the watching Zeldar. Gasps echoed from the cliffs above. This wasn't supposed to happen. The High Order's strongest warrior wasn't supposed to stumble. Jason didn't have time to celebrate. Krazel recovered almost instantly, their glowing red eyes locking onto him with something new, something dangerous. Recognition. "You fight," the warrior rumbled. Their voice was steady, but there was something else in it now. Amusement? No, something deeper. Jason barely had time to process before Krazel moved again, faster than before. He threw himself to the side, but this time, he wasn't quick enough. A clawed hand snatched him mid-dodge, gripping his entire torso like he was nothing more than an insect. The air vanished from his lungs as Krazel lifted him, their strength absolute. Jason struggled, kicking out, but the warrior didn't flinch. "I see it now," Krazel murmured, tilting their head as if studying him for the first time. The others were right to kneel. Jason gritted his teeth, pushing against the unyielding grip. "I keep telling you, I'm not." The ground beneath them shook. It wasn't just from the fight. This was different. A low, rumbling tremor spread through the arena, rising in intensity. Dust cascaded from the cliffs, and a strange, unnatural hum filled the air. The Zeldar in the crowd tensed, their antennae twitching in alarm. Then above them, the sky ripped open. Jason barely processed what he was seeing. A massive tear in the air itself, swirling with a pulsing, eerie blue light. Shapes moved within it, dark, shifting silhouettes, too many to count. The High Order leader stood at the edge of the arena, their expression unreadable. Impossible. Krazel's grip on Jason loosened. Jason took the chance. With one last desperate shove, he wrenched himself free, landing hard on the ground and stumbling back. He didn't know what was happening, but he wasn't about to waste an opportunity. Zervok rushed forward, his mandibles clicking in distress. This was not part of the trial. Jason coughed, still catching his breath. "Yeah, no kidding." Then, from the sky, the things began to descend. At first, they were just shadows. Blurred, writhing figures that didn't quite make sense. But as they drew closer, Jason felt an instinctive chill crawl up his spine. They weren't Zeldar. They weren't anything he recognized. The first of them hit the ground with a wet, unnatural thud. Its form was shifting, constantly changing, as if it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to be. Eyes, too many eyes, blinked in and out of existence across its surface. Limbs sprouted and vanished within seconds. It let out a sound Jason felt more than heard. A whispering, twisting noise that dug into his skull like claws. The Zeldar warriors around the arena hesitated, uncertain. Even Krazul stood frozen, watching the thing with something that might have been unease. Jason swallowed. So, I'm guessing this isn't one of yours. Zervok's voice was grim. No, it is not. The High Order leader took a single step forward, their red eyes narrowing. The Riftborn. Jason didn't like the sound of that. The creature twitched, then moved. It surged forward with impossible speed, tendrils of shifting black mass lashing out in all directions. The first Zeldar soldier it touched screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that cut off almost instantly as they were pulled into the shifting darkness. The crowd erupted in chaos. Jason took a step back, mind racing. He had no idea what the Riftborn were, no idea what they wanted, but one thing was obvious. They weren't here to talk. And now, it wasn't just about surviving a trial. It was about surviving at all. Jason barely had time to think before the Riftborn lunged again. It moved like liquid shadow, its form constantly shifting, limbs stretching unnaturally as it tore through the Zeldar warriors. Every soldier who tried to fight was swallowed by the dark mass, their bodies vanishing as if they had never existed. Zervok shouted something in his native tongue, rallying the remaining warriors, but Jason knew it wouldn't be enough. Swords and claws wouldn't stop this thing. Krazul, still standing tall, turned to face the High Order leader. You knew, the warrior growled. You knew the Riftborn were near. The leader's expression remained unreadable. I suspected. Jason clenched his fists. Suspected? You sent me into this stupid trial knowing there was a chance reality itself would tear open. The leader didn't respond. Another Zeldar warrior screamed as the Riftborn pulled them into its writhing form. The thing was learning, moving faster, adapting to every attack. The ground trembled beneath Jason's feet, and for the first time since crash landing on this planet, he felt true, undeniable fear. Then something strange happened. The Riftborn stopped. It didn't retreat, didn't advance. It simply hovered in place, its constantly shifting mass flickering like a glitch in reality. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, growing stronger, deeper. Jason's skin prickled as an idea formed in his mind. An insane, ridiculous idea. It wasn't attacking him. Every Zeldar warrior it had touched was gone. But it hadn't even tried to reach for him. Jason swallowed hard and took a step forward. Hey! His voice was hoarse. What do you want? The Riftborn twitched. Its mass swirled, contorting into something almost humanoid, almost recognizable. A distorted version of him. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The shadowy mimic raised an arm, mirroring his movement. Its face, his own face, rippled with strange, unreadable expressions. And then, in a voice that was both his and not his, it spoke. You do not belong here. The words sent a cold shiver through him. Yeah, Jason muttered. I figured that out a while ago. The Riftborn tilted its head. The others see you as ruler. But we see you as mistake. Jason frowned. Mistake. The Riftborn didn't answer. Instead, its form pulsed, the hum in the air growing sharper. Behind him, Zervok tensed. Krazul moved closer, ready to strike. Jason ignored them. If I leave, he said carefully, will you stop? For the first time, the Riftborn hesitated. The High Order leader finally stepped forward. This is foolishness, they said. You think it will negotiate? Jason didn't look away. I think it doesn't want me here. The Riftborn's flickering form shifted, growing unstable. The sky above crackled with strange blue light, the tear in reality pulsing like a wound struggling to close. Jason took a slow breath. I don't belong here. You're right. I didn't mean to end up on this planet. I didn't mean to conquer anything. But I'm not the enemy. The Riftborn moved closer, its mimicry of his face warping in and out of focus. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then, it reached for him. Jason didn't flinch. Darkness wrapped around him, not an attack, not a force of destruction, but something else. Something cold. His mind blurred, his vision pulsing with strange, fragmented images, planets, stars, timelines twisting in ways that made no sense. And then, he was falling. Not through air, not through space, but through something else. His body felt weightless, his thoughts slipping away, until... Light! Jason gasped, his body hitting the ground hard. Grass! Wind. A familiar sky stretching above him. He sat up, heart pounding. Earth. He was home. Somehow, impossibly, the Riftborn had sent him back. Jason stared at the skyline, his mind racing. Had any of it been real? The Zeldar? Krazel? The High Order? The war? Then, out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of shifting shadow. Jason froze. The Riftborn hadn't just sent him back. Jason's breathing was uneven as he stared at the flicker of shifting shadow. It wasn't as large as before, not the towering, all-consuming entity he had seen on the Zeldar's planet. Here, it was smaller, barely more than a ripple in the air. But it was still there. He forced himself to stand, scanning his surroundings. Cars rushed by in the distance. Streetlights flickered. The world looked normal. The weight of everything he had just experienced pressed down on him, making the familiar feel almost unreal. Had he really been gone? Or had it all happened in the span of a moment? Then the shadow moved. Jason's pulse jumped as it shifted along the pavement, stretching and twisting like it was trying to take shape again. But this time, it didn't mimic him. It flickered between forms, Zeldar warriors, the High Order leader, even Krazel. As if it was remembering. He took a careful step forward. You followed me. His voice was steady, but his mind raced. Why? What did it want now? The shadow pulsed. You exist where you should not. Jason let out a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, well, I hear that a lot. The Riftborn didn't react. The hum in the air was softer now, less overwhelming, but still there. Jason knew he wasn't in danger, not yet. It hadn't attacked him, hadn't tried to consume him like it did the Zeldar. But that didn't mean it wasn't a problem. You sent me back, he said slowly. But you didn't leave. The shadow rippled. Your path is incomplete. Jason frowned. What does that mean? No answer. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Maybe expecting a clear response from a being that existed outside of normal reality was too much to ask. But he had the sinking feeling that whatever had happened on that distant planet wasn't truly over. A thought struck him. If the Riftborn had followed him here, what about the others? Had the Zeldar survived? Had the Riftborn left their world alone now that he was gone? Or had he just abandoned them to something worse? His stomach twisted. There was no way to know. Not unless. Jason exhaled. Can you take me back? The Riftborn didn't respond right away. Then, after a long pause, its form shifted again. The streetlights flickered harder, shadows stretching unnaturally across the pavement. Jason braced himself, expecting the familiar feeling of weightlessness, of falling through something that shouldn't be. But nothing happened. The Riftborn's form pulsed. You are bound. Jason's heart sank. Bound? To where? The shadow flickered. Here. The weight of that single word hit harder than he expected. The Riftborn had brought him home, but now he couldn't leave. He was stuck. Whether it was by accident or some cosmic rule of reality, his time with the Zeldar was over. Jason let out a slow breath, trying to process the reality of it. He had fought to survive on a distant world, somehow ended up at the center of an alien civilization's chaos, accidentally conquered a planet, and now, just like that, it was over. But was it? He looked back at the shadow. You're not going anywhere, are you? The Riftborn remained silent. Jason exhaled. Guess that makes two of us. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the shifting form. He didn't know what came next, didn't know if this thing was going to be a constant presence in his life, or if it would fade away into whatever strange dimension it had come from. But one thing was clear, his life wasn't going back to normal. The Riftborn had followed him for a reason. And sooner or later, he was going to find out why. With one last glance at the flickering shadow, Jason turned and walked away, disappearing into the city lights.